Cover to Cover Book Beat. I'm your host, Roger Nichols, and we have a real treat for you today. Our guest, Dana Sutton, is a mother, grandmother, children's author, and business consultant from Kelowna, BC. Dana has helped raise many children, including all of the categories: biological, step, fostered, and adopted, as well as tutored and coached kids of all ages. And that background gives her not only experience, but insight into life from a child's point of view. And she's put that to good use. In 2024, her first book, You Can Do Hard Things, received positive reviews, including those from Kirkus. And now she's come out with her second book, Maddie Finds Her Place, which is based on her own experience with her daughter, Maddie, who initially moved in with Dana out of a youth homeless shelter. We're very pleased to welcome Dana Sutton.
Hi there, Roger. It's nice to be here.
All righty. Before we started the book, I'd like to know you a little bit better. By helping the kids, you have a big heart. Did you grow up, have a big family when you grew up?
My immediate family is not particularly large. It's just myself and my brother and my two parents. But my mom comes from a family of 12. And so there was lots of cousins and aunts and uncles over the years. And more importantly, we were a family that was very, very involved in sports and activities. We had families that we traveled with every summer and went camping with and that kind of thing. So there was always lots of people around. Yeah.
So you're comfortable with that. Obviously, I can see that because that certainly thrives through. And were you always going to be an author?
No, actually, I was one of those kids who never really knew what I was going to do. I was a bit of a pain in the butt at school. I was good at math, good at English. I enjoyed classes, but I was kind of disruptive, to be honest, because I was often finished my work before the allotted time, and then I would start chatting with my friends and socializing and that kind of thing. So that was a little bit, it was a little bit disruptive to classes, but my teachers dealt with that by having me work with other students and help tutor and that kind of thing. So that was actually my starting point of helping other people was when I was a kid.
That's great to get that background on that. It explains a lot, I think, in terms of how comfortable you are with that whole situation. And I have to ask also, in your little brief biography that actually appears in the back of the book, it says that you enjoy motorcycle trips with your husband, Ray. So is this something he brought to the marriage or something you did before?
Well, I learned a little bit when I was a young kid. One of the families we spent a lot of time with had small trail bikes, and I quite enjoyed that, and I was really enthusiastic. My brother, however, is 5.5 years older than me. And so he was the first one to get a motorcycle, and he was also the first one to end up in my mother's ER with an accident from the motorcycle. My mom was a nurse, and 24 hours later, all the motorcycles were gone in the house. So fast forward many, many, many years later, as my son was going through his teenage years, I always said to him, "You're the reason I don't have a motorcycle." Because, he did a backflip on his skis the first time when he was 8 and was one of those boys. And when he finally finished his journeyman electrician and moved out for the last time, and my husband and I were dating, and he at the time expressed an interest in getting back into motorcycle riding, and I kind of looked and went, "Now's the time." So went out and bought a motorcycle, and off we went.
And it mentions here, there's two more questions about the motorcycle because it's an unusual aspect for an author, and we don't often run into this.
Yeah.
One is you talk about enjoying both long or short trips. So what's your definition of a short ride? Is that going over to the grocery store, or is it just keeping the journey under 100 miles?
It would be keeping it under 100 miles would be a short ride.
Yeah.
My longest ride, actually, 3 summers ago, it was a 4,500 kilometer round trip by myself. That one, my husband didn't come with me because he didn't have holidays. But I went by myself and rode out to our family cabin, which is on the border of Manitoba and Ontario.
That's a ways. Yes.
Yeah, it was a great ride. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, fantastic. Well, and that leads me to the transition. Was there an event or a series of events that said, you know, I think I could make a book out of this?
Yeah, I guess how it kind of developed is I went through a divorce in my early 40s. I'd been with my ex-husband for 23 years, and we were going through a divorce, and I was doing some counseling afterwards. Just my children at the time were teenagers, so they were struggling with those things. And so I was working with a counselor and having a lot of conversations with her about the conversations I was having with my kids and how everybody was coping with things and how we were dealing with the stress of everything. And she sort of looked at me at one point and said, "Have you ever thought about writing books?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, just the way you're sort of coping with everything and your ability to have these difficult conversations with your kids and allow them to be angry with you, but also be able to communicate with them through it and that kind of thing." She said, it's really unique. And I think, you would have a lot to say in terms of writing parenting books was what she originally suggested. And I kind of laughed it off and yeah, maybe one day. I didn't really think much about it because I own a business and it's an accounting and payroll solutions business. There are times of the year where I work 7 days a week because it's tax season and I don't have a lot of extra time. And so it kind of pushed it to the back burner and thought, oh, well, maybe one day we'll talk about something like that. And then one day I was actually walking to work during tax season and taking the 25-minute break and started thinking about one of the conversations we'd had and how it actually would work very well for a children's book that could also be used for young parents in terms of giving them the message we wanted them to have, but the children could also enjoy the story.
Well, that's fascinating. And obviously, you got pretty good at it because here's book number 2 out there. Um, you could say that Maddie finds her place as a children's book. It's just a dozen or so pages,
Yeah.
425 words, because I counted them. It tells the story of a young girl who is left alone by her parents with what you call adult problems, no relatives able to help until a nice lady comes into her life and gives her the place where she is loved. And you told it in rhyme, but did it start out as a poem?
No, honestly, it really started out as the first book that I wrote, You Can Do Hard Things. That was very much based on my biological children growing up. So every incident that happened in that book happened in real life in some form. And I wanted to write something about Maddie because she had experienced so many difficult times. And in real life, Maddie came to me much later. She wasn't a small child. She was almost 17 when she moved in with me. And so she'd been through some really difficult issues. And what had impressed me with Maddie was her resilience. She hadn't gotten sidetracked. She hadn't gotten wrapped up in criminal activity. She hadn't gotten into trouble with addiction issues or anything like that. Like she had struggled through and kept herself at a spot where she could still have an opportunity to succeed. And I wanted to honor that for her. I wanted somebody to see that, this was a kid who'd been through it and come out the other side. And I thought it would be something that I wanted other kids in the similar positions to see themselves in the book.
That's very cool. And there is actually, I think, a connection between poetry and children's books because they're short. And if you have
Yes.
very few words to use, every one of them has to be chosen carefully. And isn't that fun sometimes?
Yeah, it's for both books. I tend to write the original sort of book in 45 minutes to an hour, to be very honest, where I get the idea down and I know what I want the story to be. And then I put it aside and, once every other week or so, I'll sit down and look at the words and say it out loud and read it in my head and think, okay, now I need to change this a little bit. I need to change that. And I take the next few months sort of just kind of going through and, like you say, picking specific words, changing wording. Sometimes it's more difficult than others, for sure, but I like the process.
All right. And I noticed you use the word place rather than home in the title, and that I want to find out the meaning behind that particularly.
Well, I think one of the things that with all of my kids and my grandkids is I want them, it's not about finding a single home. It's about finding your place in the world. And that's not just about a location. That's about knowing who you are, knowing what you like, knowing what you don't like, where you want to go in the world. And that's how I felt with Maddie. It wasn't about her finding a house. It was about her learning where to fit in the scheme of things.
It's also sometimes about the words that you don't use. And although at the end of the book, Maddie is living with a nice lady, who, by the way, does not
Mhm.
have a name in the book, there's no mention of the word adoption. And I'm wondering if that's because you think it might be a scarier word for younger readers.
Well, I guess it was twofold. The first was that we didn't adopt Maddie right away.
Uh,
So Maddie came in under what's called a youth agreement in Canada, and it is something where, for whatever reason, the ministry has determined a child can't go home, and the ministry pays room and board basically to a landlord, and the child goes in, but you're not in a real parenting position. And that's how Maddie came into my house. She'd been with me probably about 8 months before um, we really started to interact more in terms of a parent-child type model. And I want, again, when I write the books, I write them for the children, but also for the adults that are reading them. And it's not always about, I have to adopt this person, but there are things I can do to help these people that aren't necessarily that full thing. So it was more about that specifically than how kids look at the words adoption and that kind of thing.
okay, this is why we ask the questions here. And
Yeah.
unlike the books we normally review, this is a picture book. So, what is it like collaborating with the artist?
That was honestly probably the most difficult thing for me because I excel at numbers and words specifically and that kind of thing, but I have no visual imagination. And so if somebody says to me, "Wouldn't this room look lovely in this color?" My answer is maybe. That's possible. I don't know because I can't close my eyes and visualize what I want. So when they first gave me these storyboard books where you have to describe what do you see this picture as being, and that was actually harder for me than the writing was. And I really felt like the first book, it wasn't bad, like I didn't do a bad job, but I felt like I did a much better job in the second book of describing what I wanted in the background and providing more detail and that kind of thing. But that was difficult for me.
Right, we should give credit. The artist is Nicholas Donovan Mueller, and I find his a very I want to call it a soft style. It's very kind of accommodating and welcoming, kind of warm colors and not a lot of hard outlines and things. So I feel that's right in the kind of thing that goes well with your words.
Yeah, I was really happy with how Nicholas came through for me with the different pictures. And as I said, the better I got at describing what I wanted, the more accommodating he was, the more. So it was a really good process in the end. It was just very difficult to start.
I must say that the unnamed lady who does find a place for Maddie looks not unlike you, the author, and I'm assuming that was intentional on both your parts.
Yeah, it was. And actually Maddie's picture, we managed to get a picture of her when she was quite young. And so the picture in the book of Maddie is also fairly accurate to real life. And that's also been part because my background within our family is also very sort of wide ranging. My children, my biological children, are half Chinese. So in some of the images of our children, you'll see they look a little mixed race. And there's a lot of, it's part of, I guess, putting myself into the books
Mhm.
is that reflection of who we actually are in real life.
I want to say as I was reading this, probably for the fourth or fifth time because it's short. Uh,
Yeah.
I was delighted to discover that he worked into the illustration your real life old English sheepdogs, Guinness and Misty. I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, I grew up with Old English sheepdogs. The first book, the dogs were actually Bailey and Guinness. Bailey was our older female. The second book, it's Guinness and Misty, who is our newer Old English sheepdog. And again, part of Maddie's experience coming into our house was the dogs made her feel comfortable before we did.
Uh, which is
They were very, very welcoming to her, right? They immediately wanted to spend time with her. And I think it helped her to settle in a little bit when she first moved in.
Well, it's, sometimes animals can sense things that we can't. And obviously I thought this is one of the good ones. We should think about making this more permanent. And by
Yeah.
the way, there's one illustration, and this I thought was a really good thing that you put in there, that you love Maddie even if she's throwing a tantrum on your lap. And
Yeah.
I think that's great information to have in there, whoever reads the book, to think about that.
Hmm.
And then,
Hmm.
of course, the dogs are down there with their paws over their ears, which is a nice bit of humor that the kids will notice for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was an important message for me because it was actually one of the hardest lessons for Maddie to learn was it doesn't matter. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to get in trouble sometimes, you're going to make the wrong choice or do the wrong thing. But here, you still get to come home. You still get to be here. It's not, I mean, the unfortunate truth is her background was very difficult. And there were lots of times where something came up and she was kicked out of the house and had nowhere to go. And this is how she ended up in the homeless shelter to begin with. So, but when we finally kind of broke through the first barrier, I would say, with Maddie, and I just said to her one day, tell me all the awful things you've done. You don't understand. It's too bad. No, I said, tell me what? Tell me about these things. And she started talking about some of the things that she felt made her a bad person. And when we sort of had a 10-minute conversation about it, and then I said to her, I said, you haven't listed a single thing yet that one or both of my biological children haven't done. And they've never been hit. They've never been kicked out. They've never been horrifically punished for that. They learn from their mistakes and we expect them to move on. But you were not the problem. The problem is not the 2-year-old or the 5-year-old or even the 12-year-old or the 14-year-old. It is the adults around you who didn't have the ability to function in this situation. And that was her first time really feeling like maybe we meant what we said.
Mhm. Because kids have a tendency to think everybody, if I'm this way, I'm different than everybody else, and that's not true.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
correct.
yeah. What what do you want the readers to take away from the book when they put it down?
That it doesn't take much to help. That there's kids around. And, for me, it was at the time my husband and I weren't married yet. I was living in a house. My children had gone away to school. It was me and the two dogs. And here was a teenager that I could help. And I had the experience and I had the room and I had the space to do it. And people have asked me over the year, well, I can't believe you did it. Like, why and how? And I said, well, because she needed help. It wasn't, it's not this grand thing. It's just, hey, there's a person that I can help. And so I should. And that's what I want the adults reading it to know. And the kids, I want, like I said, I really wanted other kids that are in similar situations to see themselves and to see that it's possible to find the people that can help you, even if the grown-ups in your life aren't able to.
Oh, I have to say that this is one of the most impactful children's book I've read in a long, long time, and I want to give you some compliments on that. And I certainly hope that this goes very well for you. But I know because the way the production schedules work, you work way ahead.
Yeah.
What's up for book number three?
So I actually have both book number 3 and book number 4 in illustration right now.
All right.
So book number 3 is based on my son, who is 29 now, who spent a good portion of his time at 4 and 5 telling me all the reasons he didn't like anybody. I don't like this person and I don't like that person. And so we wrote this book called Everybody's Different. And it's, I said I don't like Tommy because he doesn't like to read. And mom says that doesn't mean anything, basically. But it'll be another rhyming story. And it's all the different people he sees on a walk that he says he doesn't like. And his parents go, you're a little bit different too. And if you don't like everybody, you're not going to have anybody to play with. So that is book number 3. And then book number 4, my grandson and my husband and my stepson are all autistic and ADHD.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so my grandson one day, he'd had a difficult day, and his daddy had said to him, you know, Papa used to have days like this too. It was really hard for Papa, my husband, which is what he calls his grandfather. And so my grandson said to me, Nana, I want you to write a story about me and Papa. And so book number 4 is called Grandpa's Just Like Me. And
Uh,
it's about some of the shenanigans the two of them got into. My husband at 3 was watching the construction crew, and when they stopped for lunch, climbed up into one of the bulldozers and started it. He'd been watching all morning very intently to see how all the buttons and things turned and did, and started it. My grandson at 3 took his little sister while dad was having a nap and decided he would go out to the store, and went down to the bus stop and couldn't understand why the grown-ups were upset that he was just going to the store with his sister. So they both have had what we would call autistic ADHD moments, and it's just a compare and contrast, and about how it helps River, my grandson, to recognize that he's not the only one. Again, he's not the only one who feels this way and has these issues.
Fantastic. Is there anything that I've not asked you want to make sure that gets in the story here, like website, where to find the books, etc.?
So the books can be ordered online through any of the major book providers. So Indigo Books in Canada, Barnes and Noble, Walmart.com in the US is carrying them. Amazon, they're on Amazon as well. And then I have my personal website, danasuttonbooks.com. So they can also be purchased through there. And then, the other thing that I'd really like to be included was, I wrote the book for this second book, Maddie Finds Her Place, because I wanted other children like Maddie to see themselves in the book. But when Maddie and I talked about it, Maddie wanted it written for the grown-ups because she said, we see each other. We know we're out here. We see the other kids like us, but we want the grown-ups to see us and see that we're there. So it was a very interesting twist on what I thought I was doing. Oh, I'm doing a great job doing this. And she was like, no, that's the wrong reason. I don't want that. I want it so that the grown-ups know to look for us and help us.
It's interesting because it's written in such a way that this 76-year-old got stuff out of it, and so will a
Yeah.
5-year-old, I think.
Yeah. That I think is my biggest goal when I'm writing these books is that can we give something to both the children hearing the story and looking at the pictures and the adults that are reading the books to them.
Well, I just hope many, many people follow your example in life as well as an author. Our guest today has been Dana Sutton. The book is Maddie Finds Her Place, illustrated by Nicholas Donovan Mueller. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.